Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Josh Dorfman, co-founder of Supercool and Planted. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk with you.
So from UPenn till starting these two companies, what would be your career highlights?
Geez, the career highlights between that. Well, I got my career start in many ways in China in the 1990s. That was absolutely a highlight, changed my life. I went there to teach English on a university, was very interested in kind of cross-cultural understanding, communications, thinking about maybe becoming a diplomat. And I got a part-time job. So I was teaching on a university and I got a part-time job that became a full-time job working in a factory that made bicycle locks. At the time in China, 1 billion people were riding bikes. There were no cars. It's not the biggest automobile market in the world as it is today. It was the biggest bicycle market. And so that really shifted my trajectory to business. It was just an unbelievable experience. We opened lots of factories and got me very interested in business and also got me very interested in climate because I started seeing over the time I was there this transition underway from bicycles to cars, and not just the cars. You started to see more cars, but you started seeing bridges and tunnels and highways connecting cities for the first time. And I thought, man, I don't know anything about climate. I don't know anything about the environment per se, but how's this going to work when there's 1 billion more cars here? And then of course we think about India and Eastern Europe and everywhere else that's developing very quickly and moving into a modern lifestyle. How do we enable modern lifestyles while still enabling a more sustainable future for everyone? And that's really been a through line for me, which then led to a number of companies that I've started around sustainability, media companies I've run. I've done a whole suite of things, but yeah, where I am now with Planted and Supercool, really excited about the innovation that we're pushing today.
That sounds incredible. What was some things you learned the hard way in your career?
Well, the challenge for me is that I tend to learn everything the hard way. People say you should get mentors. Mentors are really important. You should you should work in places where you can learn a lot before you strike out on your own. I never had a mentor and I never went somewhere where I could learn before I struck out on my own. I was just ready to like jump into the world and try to make things happen. So you learn everything the hard way. I think for me, the realization that took me a long time to understand is that as an entrepreneur, as a founder, with the right team, the right co-founding team, you can get so much further, so much faster. And that was something I had to learn the hard way. My first company was a modern design, eco-friendly furniture company. And this goes back 2 decades, really before anyone was thinking, or most people were thinking about a sustainable lifestyle and how do we line what we purchase with our values. This was pretty new. And I had started this company by myself. I was so passionate about this idea that I moved to New York City to be close to these excellent designers that were using reclaimed materials from these very famous pianos called Steinway pianos. They would take the scraps and make these really cool, tables and stuff. And there were other great designers. I was so passionate about this that I turned my apartment in Brooklyn into my furniture showroom. And I lived in it for 4 years because I couldn't afford New York City rents for a furniture showroom. So I was like, well, I'm just going to combine them and I'm going to live in this thing. And that had upside. I had a beautiful, beautifully furnished apartment, but I burned out. After 4 years, I was just toast because I literally lived in my business 24/7. I never got a break.
Mm.
And so I've learned over time that there is with startups, you're running as fast as you possibly can, but actually maybe I should say that differently. With startups, you want to run fast, maybe 3/4, because it is a
Yeah.
marathon, right? It's not a sprint. And I was sprinting for 4 years and that is not sustainable. So things like that I've learned the hard way.
So now you take breaks. I also see there are some good books in the background. So those are some pseudo mentors.
Yeah, I suppose you could say, well, that's a very good point. And not just on climate books or sustainability books. Oh, look at that. The 2 top ones are mine. Who knew that those were even on the pile? But not even from those types of books, just reading in general has informed my worldview. When I was younger, I read a lot of books, whether it was by Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises, For Whom the Bell Tolls, or other really great authors that just opened my eyes to the fact that, whoa, it's a really big world, so much bigger than just this growing up, pretty comfortable in Westchester County outside of New York City, it just opened my eyes to just being more curious, wanting more discovery, wanting to interact with the world. And so, yeah, books, you could say books have been my mentors. It's an interesting observation.
Right. Take us through the initial days of Planted. How did you come up with idea, pilot, in finding customers, all the juice?
Yeah, absolutely. Planted has been one of the most, also, I think to your first question, certainly one of the most significant, profound experiences of my life. And I feel very fortunate to have started this venture like 2 decades into my career. The way it came about was I was in North Carolina. North Carolina historically has been one of the furniture making capitals of the world. So I was on to my second furniture company. We were manufacturing in North Carolina. And I was starting to feel very frustrated with the availability of materials or sustainable materials, because the best material that you could make furniture out of, in theory, from like a sustainability perspective, is like wood that comes from a responsibly harvested, that's responsibly harvested. And I just thought, well, we're still cutting down trees. Like, really? That's as far as we've advanced as a civilization by the 21st century. We're just going to do it smarter. There has to be something better. And in that moment, as I was wrestling with this, I was introduced to another entrepreneur who had just moved to North Carolina. He had a small manufacturing company as well. It's kind of close in to furniture. And we got on the phone and he's looking at my company saying, wow, Josh, you can build this incredible company. You can do all this good for the world. And I was like, no, man, we're still cutting down trees. I don't know. And he's like, well, what would you do differently? And I said, well, maybe we could use a material like hemp that grows faster. I don't really know a lot about hemp, but there's got to be something. And then I didn't know this guy at all. And he says to me, he's like, oh, well, I've got 6 giant trash bags of hemp in my garage. And suddenly I said, what? Like, who are you? Where'd you come from? And he's like, well, I just moved here. I'd spent 8 years at SpaceX. I was in charge of keeping astronauts on the Dragon crew spacecraft. I was in charge basically of the life support systems. And now I'm here in North Carolina. And so from that very initial conversation, we both got excited about materials. WADA was already very excited about carbon removal, pulling carbon from the atmosphere, because Elon Musk was already talking quite a bit about it 4 years ago. In fact, he underwrote an X Prize competition, a $50 million carbon removal X Prize competition. So this was already something that WADA was thinking a lot about. And as an engineer at SpaceX, thinking about life support systems, well, what's that? That's basically carbon regulation in a tiny bubble to keep astronauts alive in space. And so we quickly said, well, man, what if we try to figure out some biomass that grows faster than trees so it can absorb, through photosynthesis, pull carbon from the atmosphere faster. And then we turn that into some useful, durable material so that we don't have to just use trees and lumber. And then we said, well, where do trees and lumber really go? Well, some of it goes into tables. Most of it goes into new homes in America, or homes that are being, renovated, but mostly it goes into homes. And so we said, I wonder if there's a way to figure out some biomass that has enough structure that we could actually make it into something that could replace trees in home building, pull carbon from the atmosphere, and build a really big company. We kind of discussed all this in about 20 minutes. And I said to him, I was like, look, I know we don't know each other, but here's what I think we should do. I'm going to shut my company. I think you should shut your company. Let's go build this company, because this could be absolutely massive. And he was like, well, yeah, maybe, sure. 2 weeks later, he came to Asheville in Western North Carolina, where I was living. We took a walk and we said, are we really going to do this? And we said, well, let's really explore it. Let's go see if we can get on the phone with some people who not can tell us necessarily if it's a good idea, but yeah, like, of course, let's go talk to home builders and see what we should do. And so we did that to kind of start to refine what the product might be. But really who I wanted to talk to were people within this bigger kind of engineered materials industry, specifically with home building, because you have giant companies. And I wanted to get an understanding of, if we started a small company to try and take on this industry, would they just try and crush us with like taking us to court or legal restrictions, or just, what would that look like? So we got an executive who had been in one of these huge companies and had just retired. We got him on the phone and we asked him the question, and he started laughing. He was like, I can promise you, no one's going to pay any attention to you at all because, even if you got very big, you would be so small in this massive industry. So essentially, that's how we got started. And Planted today, it's been a very through line 4 years later, where we identified a very fast growing grass, kind of like bamboo, grows as fast as bamboo. I mean, it can shoot up, 50, 60 feet tall in a season. It's just crazy. And we got more SpaceX engineers to leave Los Angeles and move to North Carolina. And we built a first of its kind production technology that can take this grass, slice it very thin, put a little bit of resin on it, and then run it through a kind of a press that's about 40, 50 feet long, and out the other end comes structural building materials that replace trees in the built environment. And the first one for us is a 4 foot by 8 foot panel with that you nail to the 2x4s when you're putting a house together, right? So that's our first product. And then we got, and I can get into the how we did it if you want, but we did get the largest home builder in America, which is a company called D.R. Horton. They make 1 out of every 7 new homes. Humongous company, to early on buy into our process. And over the past year, we received an order from them for 10 million of these structural planted panels. Now that's thousands and thousands and thousands of homes. So in a matter of 4 years, we've gone from an idea to a business that just closed its Series B funding round and has an incredible path to commercial scale.
So much to unpack. Like that's you made it sound like smooth and easy. And is it one sidetrack question is for North Carolina, since you mentioned it's a furniture capital, is that the reason High Point is also organized there, the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it the other way. High Point is part of that, the part of the very infrastructure that has made North Carolina such a premier place for furniture, right? So it's not why it's there. It's like, it's been part of the growth, but that goes back,
Mm.
yeah, probably a couple of 100 years. Yeah. Where in that area where the High Point, where that trade show and expo is, that really is like the main region of where all of this furniture manufacturing has historically taken place.
And I also want to share, like, so people who are following along on the video to visually see how the product looks like in such a cool animation. So when you started, did it start like with the panel, or were there other products you also experimented?
We have a product development pipeline that will eventually reach probably every component of construction that uses wood today that's engineered, right? So that's really what we're able to replace. The reason why we started with the panel is because this is a business which aims for the biggest impact it can possibly have, right? We are going for, especially when you work, as you can imagine, with people from SpaceX, right? There's no, the only end state is domination. And so if you're trying to dominate an industry and you're starting, then our view was, let's go after the engineered wood material that is the biggest part of every new home. What's the biggest market? And that is these engineered wood panels that are known either as oriented strand board, OSB, because you're orienting the sliced strands of a tree, right? Or plywood, which is just basically more orientation of, right, these thin sheets of veneer of wood that get oriented in a direction, and the direction they're oriented in tends to be the strength direction, right? Because they're all oriented the same way. But if you were to put in the other direction, right, and they're very weak because it's, right, you've got all these panels,
Mm.
they're all layered on in parallel to each other, or stacked on top of each other, right? Our product is actually not oriented. That's also what's kind of amazing about it, is because we use a grass that we can effectively, I mean, you can almost say shave, slice much thinner than how you can, shave or cut a tree, really. We can use more, we can use more fiber in our panel. We can press, more layers of this fiber, and we get to a panel that is not oriented, yet is as strong or stronger than the products that are in the market today. The funny thing about home building in the US is that home builders don't really care about that. The industry is because what the industry is optimizing for, or has optimized for, is let's make homes good enough as cheap as possible. Right. So,
Mm,
and what we're saying is like, we can do as cheap as possible. We can also do far superior in terms of quality. And that's a shift that we're working on as well.
I'm really curious to know for, let's say, a structural engineer or a designer to use this material in their homes. Like sometimes, like they have to do the calculations for how much load it can carry, what's the strength. So training the designers to use this material, that could be one friction. Second is the friction from adoption in terms of certification and everything. So what are those things which uh, you had to resolve and overcome?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Wada, who I mentioned, who is our chief technology officer, was really so well positioned from his time and experience to his experience, and I should say, in time at SpaceX, to really understand the rigor of how you put a material through the certification process, how you consistently, test and develop and work that process. So we've gone through, all of the certifications required for home building. We've worked with some really wonderful laboratories. He has spent a lot of time on site, ensuring that process. The product has gotten all of the, kind of, we've checked all the boxes that the product itself needs to be able to be installed on a new home. The other part is, with that, while that is still the case, there, in this industry, the home inspectors, or the people who need to, county by county, city by city, who are perhaps hesitant to just approve a new material that they are unfamiliar with. That's an education process. And one of the things that we realized as we were building this company and thinking about our path to market was, if we go to market, let's say, with a company like D.R. Horton, and we're going into, D.R. Horton new homes and D.R. Horton planned communities, then that enables two things. It enables lots of scale right away, right? Because if D.R. Horton's going to be in, again, let's say North Carolina, if, Raleigh or Durham, North Carolina, big fast growing housing markets, if they're going to put in 300 or 400 homes, okay, well, that's a lot of volume right away. Plus it's one inspector, and we can go, if we need to, educate that inspector, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of grow into DR Horton's, its future growth. And as we move into new markets with DR Horton, it's just another way for inspectors and, different municipalities to get a comfort level and familiarity with our product, instead of us having to go do it all by ourselves. And so we realized that there would be two potential paths to market for a company like Plantd. One is the path we're taking, which I do believe is the path of least resistance. And we're fortunate to have it. The other one would be, we go try to find smaller, just because they are smaller, green home builders that share our values, and try to sell in much smaller quantities to those who you think would be more, very, very, ideologically aligned with our product. But that is, but then you have all those other challenges that you're referring to, right? Then you got to be in lots of different markets, and maybe smaller markets, and you're educating everybody, the entire industry, all at once about your product. And that is such a challenge for any company, especially a startup that has limited resources.
I was just thinking also, like the like US Passive House Institute, if they have like some recommendation, because those are the people who align with energy conservation, sustainability. It could be an interesting partnership.
Yeah, we've built a lot of those relationships. Again, I think for us, we just have this massive order to fulfill that just gives us such a straight path to scale. And then we have other contracts that we're putting in place too for, additional products like, potentially engineered 2x4s or, maybe engineered headers or other components where if we have the right partner who we can go to market with that already has the market, then yes, we want to build all of these relationships for our long-term future, like you're talking about, but we become less dependent on them right now.
Mm.
And so it enables the company to be very, very focused on product development, on technology development, on agricultural development. Because for a business like Planted, and very often for climate companies that are doing something new in the market, very often your only path to market is to do everything, right? You have to be vertically integrated, whether you want to or not. And of course, that's harder, right? So we had to say, okay, we're going to grow this. We've identified a certain perennial grass that works for our use case. There is no supply chain. Nobody grows this grass. We can't call
Mhm.
anyone and say, hey, we'll take 100 tons of this grass, please. There's no one to call. And so we had to stand up our own tissue culture lab, our own greenhouse operations, build the relationships directly with farmers. We've gotten tobacco farmers in North Carolina to convert to our 21st century climate crop. We have to control all of that. We have to control the farming equipment used to harvest it. We have to develop it because no one's going to do it with us. There is no one to do it. No one's going to go build a factory the way we want a factory because the largest companies that build factories are like, you're an N of one. Why would we spend all this, money developing technology just for you? You're probably going to go out of business anyway in 5 years, right? Like all of this risk. And so that's because we have these really wonderful commercial relationships, we can stay very focused on everything we need to do to scale up this vertically integrated supply chain. And the great news is, and what I think you do see for companies that are able to make it to commercial viability is once you're commercially viable and you're vertically integrated, it is very difficult for competitors to catch up because
Mhm.
nobody really knows what you're doing and how you're doing it. So it is a big moat around the business, and that's why it's such an emphasis for us.
I have such a huge admiration because there's so many challenges, there's so many moving parts to figure out to run this business. So I guess like this business really tests the patience and perseverance of the founder.
Well, I think that's true. And so and I do think every entrepreneurs, startup founders, there are very few, and I'm not one of them. There are very few that can go the distance with their company as the co-founding, as the CEO, right? We think of, oh, Mark Zuckerberg, like Elon or like those guys are the rare exception. Most CEOs have a phase where they are really strong within the growth of a company, right? Some are more mature, some are in the acceleration phase, some are early. I'm a great early CEO when this is just a kernel of an idea. And so I was the CEO for the first 3 years of the company. I stepped down as CEO last year. Nathan, one of our co-founders from SpaceX, who came in as the chief operating officer, has stepped in as the CEO. And man, like he and our other SpaceXers they're such powerhouses. And so, you know, his ability to, my ability is I can sell a vision, I can bring a product to market. I'm much more kind of commercial focused. Nathan, as an operator coming from SpaceX and his capabilities and ability to see all these pieces and move everything in a coordinated, synchronized way is just extraordinary to me. So we have great leadership. You also need with a business like this, you need venture capital, and you want to hope that that venture capital is aligned and to a certain degree patient, because it does take some number of years for this business to really show its power in the market, right? When I'm talking to you about we're building this moat around the business, that is going to become, it may take another 3 or 4 years because before that is really visible. And then the industry does turn around and they're like, oh man, I wish we had stamped that thing out when it was just,
Mm.
this weird looking, unidentifiable, wild, you know, kind of weed growing in the wild. Now we got a problem on our hands. What do we do? And I think that that's just, with a business like this, it just takes a little more time if you succeed to get there.
Nice. Can you share a bit about go-to-market or lessons learned in reaching out to home builder? Like, do you do cold call? Do you do email? Do you do LinkedIn outreach? What works? What doesn't work? If someone is building solutions to sell it to home builders.
I don't think my experience has been there's no one channel that's necessarily better than the others. I think the question really is, you don't know for sure, but how can you either reach as many as possible quickly so you can check off all the no's and maybe through that start to get smarter about where you focus your attention, whether you're doing that through LinkedIn outreach. And let me back up. Maybe let's say this. The strategy that we used at Plantd was, at least initially, was less about let's go do outreach and more about let's go try to build awareness and some notoriety that creates inbound, right? How do we build some notoriety here? And so that's, again, early on, and that plays a lot more to my strength. So early on, we would do things, and this was particularly effective for LinkedIn. And now that I'm actually reflecting on it as you're asking the question, I would say, yes, LinkedIn is where you really want to be, but not necessarily just to ping some executive, because I don't know that works. But if you can build a really great business like LinkedIn channel, LinkedIn profile, particularly I think for home building and construction, it can really break through because most of the kind of company marketing is awful and boring and terrible. And so we got a lot of feedback, actually, both from investors, which was great, and from builders that they really loved what we were posting on LinkedIn. We were one of their favorite follows because we would do things that we knew we were the challenger. We knew we were the underdog. And so we knew that we didn't have to look so buttoned up. So one of the first videos we did that went really viral was we had a planted panel, and this was when we were doing prototypes that were maybe like 6 inches by 10 inches, like the size of a piece of paper. But we made it look like it was a lot bigger in this somehow when we did the shot. And so we had our little panel. And at the time, this was before we found perennial grass, it was actually made from hemp. And then we had like an industry OSB panel. And we did this like pretty grainy, but sledgehammer test where we dropped sledgehammers at the same time on both panels. It bounced off ours and it went right through the wood panel. And we just put that up and it took off. I mean, it took off so much that I think it's now in a museum in Munich. It's just the response was fascinating. And so we were very intentional about being a challenger, not being so stuffy, willing to just have a personality on LinkedIn. And that was a very, very useful strategy for gaining awareness for our business.
That's such a great insight. I also want to know what was your inspiration about Supercool?
Supercool came right after Plantd. So when I stepped down as CEO, and I'm still operating as, of course, and will always, but as an advisor to the company, and doing whatever I can. But when I stepped down as CEO, and now I kind of picked my head up and looked around the innovation space around climate. I'd been so focused on material and construction and home building. And so in 2024, when I started looking around to think, what am I going to do next? What's out there? What's working? I was pretty blown away pretty quickly by how much innovation around climate is already at commercial scale. That is actually already, all these companies that are scaling up, cutting carbon, delivering great products and solutions to market. It was just like Plantd for me, but it was on a broader scale thinking, wow, in many respects, the future is here, and the companies building the future, they're succeeding right now. This isn't a someday, hopefully wishful thinking, cross our fingers and pray that we're going to figure out climate change. It's like, no, like, holy cow, there are all these solutions in market that are great for businesses, great for climate, and great for customers too. They usually in some way also improve quality of life at the same time. And I thought, this needs to be covered more. Years ago, I had a TV show and a radio show called The Lazy Environmentalist, where I would travel around America helping lazy Americans go green in ways where they didn't have to work very hard. So it was a reality TV show on Sundance Channel, which was a channel Robert Redford had started, and a radio show, a daily radio show on Sirius XM. So it was a bit of an accidental thing that I kind of fell into, that I created this whole thing. But I have some experience in media. And so last year I started thinking, you know what? I think there's a real gap here in the media landscape. I think there's a real gap here in how media is telling the story about climate. They're missing it. Like, all this innovation is now real. It's not a pilot. It's not in a lab. It's not just about some huge funding round that gets a lot of coverage, but there's no product in market yet. These products are in market and they're taking market share and delivering great value. Supercool tells those stories and case studies those businesses and really dives into what's the playbook these companies are using to win, because this is so interesting and important. We want other companies to be able to use these same playbooks to do the same thing so we can speed up the low carbon future and get there much faster. We're a podcast, we're a newsletter, we're the fastest growing YouTube channel in the climate space right now. And we just launched this course called the Climate Adoption Playbook that actually brings together all this knowledge in a pretty quick, fast-moving format that enables operators, whether they're in startups or large corporations, to be able to see exactly what today's leading climate companies are doing to win customers, scale revenue, capture market share, and then apply those same principles and adoption levers to their own business.
Do you get enough sleep?
No, I definitely don't. But it's also a combination of the fact that, I'm very passionate about this. This is also a startup, so I'm working very hard on it. And I'm also very into playing fantasy football with my son and my friends. And so that too, we're right in the middle of football season. So, the combination of Supercool and fantasy football. Yeah, no, I'm not getting a lot of sleep these days.
Amazing. If someone has to start a climate tech company right now, and they have to plan the next 3 to 6 months, what would be the step-by-step playbook you would suggest to do?
All right. So if someone had an idea for a climate tech company, I would say, let's go
Fresh
through.
college grad.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe let's actually even take it back a step further. And maybe this is your question. If someone says, I want to start a climate tech company, what should I start? Right. Even from that point of view, I would say I'd say two things. What is inherently interesting to you? What business challenge is interesting to you? That's the most important thing, because in my view, every business in some respect, or every industry, is going to have climate businesses that win and ultimately take the industry, because the low carbon economy, $2 trillion was invested in clean energy technologies in 2024. It's going to be more this year globally. Fossil fuels, it's doubling fossil fuels. And, this trend is only going in one direction, no matter the politics of any country. It can't be stopped. And so every market's a growth market, in my view. So what interests you? And, and then if you want to get a little deeper and you say, okay, well, these are the industries that interest me. If you're building climate tech, I would then go look and say, what's the funding landscape for these industries? Who's funding these types of companies? What venture capitalists or what, seed investors are funding these types of companies? Because you want to be in a lane, you want to be in a sector where investors are writing checks. Right? Like that's, and at every stage, right? Early, and then say, okay, I would be thinking about that. Who could my potential targets for investment be at every kind of stage of the growth of my industry? Do I think there's a real viable path to capital if everything else works out, right? That's what I would be thinking about. And then I would, again, coming back to part of this conversation, who can I do this with? Who do I think would be good co-founders to do this with, or people to explore? And in those relationships, I would try if it were possible to not just sign some contract right away that says we're getting married and we're going to spend the next, 5 to 10 years together, because you just don't know. And often that's not necessarily going to work out. I would try to say, look, if you want to do this with me, let's try and do a project together. Let's try and do
Mhm.
some things together before we actually, write the contract that says we are co-founders. Let's make sure that we're vibing and we feel like our work styles and our personalities mesh. And try and get some, especially if you're coming right out of college, right? Let's try to, if you have it already, awesome. But if not, even if it's your buddies, like, let's see professionally, do we align work style wise? Like, that's so important. I would be thinking about those things. And then as I start to think about a product or a solution, it comes back to, in my view, you can build awesome technology. You can create, you can innovate, like you assume, okay, you're going to have the tech chops to do that. I would be as early as possible thinking about what is going to be my adoption strategy. And it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I'm going to build a great product and someone's going to buy it. That's just never how it works. And so we see companies, and the things that I try to help early stage companies understand is like, what's your, how do you think about how you're going to price your product? And are there ways to drive down that price so you can undercut, where the industry is today? And you say, well, how might you do that? And so one example is a company like Forum Mobility. This is a company that built the largest EV charging depot at any port in the world. It's at the Long Beach port in California. And so it's thinking about semi trucks and how they're moving to take shipping containers off those, huge, huge ships and move them to warehouses. All of that runs on diesel. And they said, well, how do we start to transition this industry to EV semi trucks? Some of them are out there. Volvo and some others have proven technologies. Tesla's coming with theirs soon. And so they said, well, let's do the charging depot. We want to get more people comfortable with switching. And then they said, but these trucks cost like $500,000. And this industry is really run by a lot of mom and pop companies that don't necessarily have $500,000 lying around to ditch the diesel one and go to EV. So then they said, what if we bundle an EV truck, an 18-wheeler with charging, and make it like a SaaS company or, a subscription model where you just pay a
Mhm.
monthly price and you get your EV truck, you get your charging, you get all your maintenance in one price that's going to be lower than the price of running on diesel, right? So that's how they get to a place where now they can drive adoption for really what they want to do, right? Are they a charging company? Kind of. They're not a trucking company, but they're trying to build they're a business model innovation company that enables them to achieve their goals and build a really big business. And so that's adoption, right? And the earlier you can think about that, the more you're going to be building and designing your product in the right way. And the more you're going to have a compelling story, of course, for your investors, the greater your odds of winning. So I would be thinking about innovation in tech, and I would be thinking about adoption as early as you possibly can.
Taking notes. I have a rapid fire round before we wrap up. You have 5 to 10 seconds to answer, and you can't exceed more than 10 words.
Okay,
Who is your role model?
my mom.
Your favorite book?
The story of Jesus as told through the eyes of his child best friend, Biff.
Your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is, I don't know, it's techno term. I call it Fudgies. It's the local deli in Armonk, New York, where I grew up, run by my friend.
I see. Your favorite movie?
The Natural.
The best piece of advice you have received till date?
Just do the right thing.
3 words your best friend would describe you as.
Funny, risk taker, unconventional.
A city which is in your travel bucket list.
Copenhagen.
If you get a chance, what is one policy change you would do?
Carbon tax.
What would you say to your 18-year-old self?
Go find a mentor.
Josh, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end on that note?
Nope. I think we covered so much, and I appreciate it, Myra. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about all this. Thank you.
You have such an inspiring journey and story. Thanks for sharing with us.